Hi, class. Thank you again for your willingness to work this situation out due to my husband's surgery. And it did work out very well because I would have probably had to cancel this class anyway and do it for Tuesday. My husband is not getting out till tomorrow, which is Monday. And his surgery went well, but there were not complications, but some issues that needed to be dealt with in the hospital before they could release him. So tomorrow looks good. We're excited that he'll get to come home, and Tuesday's a go, and I'm very excited to hear all of your speeches coming up. But this is an important chapter, so listen carefully, fill out your handouts, and make sure that you send me a copy of it. I don't care if you take a picture or on both sides, or if you can send it via an attachment so that I know that you saw it and that you will get, so that you attend. You will get credit for attending by attending this way for my lecture. Also, too, I don't have the PowerPoint here, but I've either sent it to you via email or go to Canvas for today's class. Just look up the PowerPoint in assignments and it will be there also. So I'll try to remember to tell you to go to the next slide, but you will be able to follow along. All right, so first off, when we're going to give a persuasion speech, we need to remember that it is a process. It's a process of creating, reinforcing, or changing people's beliefs or actions. That's your goal when you give a persuasion speech. It's the ability to speak and write persuasively. When you can do that, it will benefit you for every part of your life. Something as simple as going to a grocery store and you need to be refunded something and you have to convince them. Persuasion. You're invited to, or you're at a PTA meeting someday and they're going to do something that you don't approve of in your child's class. You have to speak at the meeting. You just know in your heart, you got to give your opinion. You got to learn those skills so that people listen to what you have to say. Might not agree, but they'll listen. And that is our goal. When you give a persuasion speech, always remember you're an advocate. And we kind of know what advocate means, and but listen to the definition. It's a person who publicly supports or recommends a particular cause or policy. That's what you are when you give a persuasion speech. You are going to publicly, in our class, support or recommend a particular cause or policy that you want to share with the class. So your job is to get your listeners to agree and perhaps act on that belief. That's your goal. You're always trying to get your listeners on board. Remember, you could be defending an idea. You could be refuting an opponent. You could be selling a program, or maybe you're there just to inspire people to action, or maybe all four of those, maybe two of those, maybe three of those, maybe just one. All of those are used in some way when you're using persuasion speeches. Will you be using some of the same skills for your informative speeches that we've learned? Yes, always. But the difference is you will have new skills when you are presenting a persuasion speech, because your goal is not to inform. Your goal is to affect your listeners' beliefs, attitudes, or actions in some way. While we do this, goes back to what we learned earlier in the semester. We've got to keep in mind the ethics, and you can change your PowerPoint, the ethics and persuading. How do they go hand in hand? Well, if you remember, ethics is the moral principle that governs a person's behavior or conduct, or while conducting an activity. So you got to use proper ethics, your morals. How you present will give you credibility, or they'll turn you off and not listen to you. So you can't shade the truth. You got to be honest. You can't fudge the facts or the stats to make you look good. You got to be honest. Quotes, don't change them. Don't change the wording. Don't use opinions as facts. If it's your opinion, tell that. Share that. Be honest. Don't use prejudice or stereotypes to somehow promote what you want to persuade an audience about. If you do those things, or if you aren't honest in your ethics of how you present, you will lose the bond of trust with your audience that is vital for a speaker's credibility. Even though you want everybody to agree with you and you hope they'll jump on board, what you want more is that you're credible and they listen. Because they might not jump on board today, but they might tomorrow, or they might later the more they think about it. So your goal is to be heard when you are having a persuasion speech, and defend your goals ethically, knowing the facts through honesty and accuracy will make your persuasion speech effective. Remember, there are degrees of persuasion. There is a psychology of persuasion. And remember, there's a neutral area. If you turn to the next slide, the neutral's in the middle. And you're going to get from slightly opposed, slightly in favor. That might go to, wait a minute, moderately opposed, moderately in favor, to strongly opposed or strongly in favor. There's a psychology in there. While you're presenting, they may not care at all about your subject. But then as you're presenting, they might start one or the other, slightly opposed, slightly. That's where you want to kind of keep an audience. If you are going to draw them in, you want them, even if they disagree with you, that it's slightly. Yes, there will be those that are strongly, but you still can be respectful so that you'll be heard. There are two principles in the psychology of persuasion that you have to constantly be mindful of, and that's the mental dialogue and your target audience. Let's take a look at the mental dialogue first. Go to the slide. The mental dialogue is a mental give and take between the speaker and the listener, between you and the listener, back and forth. That listener is constantly going, I don't agree. Oh, that's interesting. That makes me think. Maybe I do agree. Oh, I agree 100%. There's always this mental, think of yourself when you've been at a convention or you're at or a classroom and you're sitting there and do I agree with that? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I have a question. It's a constant mental dialogue that a listener has. So remember, you have to always be aware that when you are giving a persuasion speech, that it's something that you do with an audience, not to an audience. See the difference? With an audience includes them. What can I do and what can I say that includes my audience and that I care about what they think? But this is what I think, not, well, I don't care. If you have a persona that it's going to come across that I don't really care what you think, I'm just telling you what I think. You've lost them. You're going to lose them. And probably those who were maybe slightly disagreeing are probably going to start being moderate to strongly. So we have to get to that point that we're with the audience and not to the audience. Yes, I'm not going to lie. The persuasion speeches are tougher to prepare than an informative speech. Why? Because you're basically stating facts in an informative speech. when you are doing a persuasive speech, it requires more research, more prep time, because you are trying to present something to an audience to draw them in, not just listen to what you're going to just share. You're drawing them in. You won't persuade them all. That's okay. But there's that target audience that you want to get. Who is your target audience? It's the portion of the whole audience that the speaker most wants to persuade. Now, a good tool is what we've learned in the past is our surveys. Take a survey of the class. You could do that in the next couple weeks. I'll give you time during class if you want to do it. And you could have a question that you want to know. How many of you believe? Do you believe? Do you agree? Or do you disagree? Then that gives you a feel of what our class thinks. Now you can go back and go, okay, this is my speech. I'm going to persuade, and half of them don't agree with me. So you might have to tailor your speech a little differently, that they listen. That doesn't mean you're going to, fluff it up so that, it's politically correct no, I'm not saying that. I want you to be able to share your heart, share what you believe. But what you do have to be respectful, because you're presenting with an audience, and it gives you more information to understand how you want to present it when you've got half of them maybe that don't agree with you. You might need more stats. You might need more information. But it gives you insight into our audience. So think about trying to do that you might want to check out your audience before you give that speech and know kind of where they're going. Remember, advertisers do this all the time. They take surveys all the time to kind of get a feel how they want to meet the needs of an audience, to draw them in to buy their product. So we've got to learn from that when we have persuasive speeches that we all our life will be involved in some way. We want to get better at how to present to that target audience. All right, let's move on to the next slide after target audience. There are 3 types of persuasive speeches that we will be learning about here in this class. And they are persuasive speeches that are called questions of fact, questions of value, and questions of policy. Those are the 3 major types of persuasive speeches. So let's look at the next slide to find, which is the question of fact, the first one, to take a look at how we can organize these and do them effectively. The first one is questions of fact, as I stated, and the definition is, a question about the truth or falsity of an assertion, and you're trying to present that an audience would accept your view of those facts. So how do we set that up? How are we going to do that? Well, a persuasive speech on a question of fact is similar to an informative speech, but the difference is you've got to think about. The informative speech is nonpartisan. That means I'm not biased about anything. I'm just presenting the facts like we've done in these previous informative speeches. But for a persuasive speech, it's on a question of fact, it will be partisan. You will strongly support or like a cause or a policy or something, a person. You're going to support something. You will be an advocate, which is what we've talked basically for any speech that's of persuasion. But you present one view as persuasively as possible in your questions of fact. It's a viewpoint of a type of persuasion speech. So you want to make sure that you know what you're doing and you're not just presenting facts. I need to know, do you agree or do you not agree? Are you trying to have us agree with you or not agree? When you organize a persuasion speech that is considered a question of fact, you always do it topically. You always set it up topically with, like we were learning, there's different topics for the main points. And then each main point in your speech will present a reason why someone should agree with you. That is how you set up a persuasion speech that is a question of fact. Now, I told you there's 3 kinds. The one that we're probably going to focus on for our class will be the policy, questions of policy. We'll get to that. But I want you to understand, when you give one with questions of fact, this is how you would set it up. Let's take a look at the examples. If you go on in your PowerPoints, there's a question of fact example. To persuade my audience that an earthquake of 9.0 or above on the Richter scale will hit California in the next 10 years. Then the central idea, there are 3 good reasons to believe that an earthquake of 9.0 or above on the Richter scale will hit California in the next 10 years. Set up a little bit differently when it comes to persuasion speeches, because it might not be super clear for your 3 main points, or too much that you have to keep it simple. But it gives you an idea, and you can read through the question of fact main points. They had 3 main points there for a question of fact persuasion speech. Just take a moment, you can read that. Let's move on to the question of value. If you're doing a persuasion speech that's based on a question of value, first off, you got to realize that the persuasion speech will be about the worth, rightness, morality, and so forth of an idea or an action. So it's more about beliefs and moral values, things like that. That is the type what a questions of value would be. These questions of a persuasion speech demand beliefs about right and wrong, good and bad, moral, immoral, personal beliefs. But it's not just about opinion. You have to justify. In a persuasive speech on questions of value, you still have to justify your opinion / claim. You can't just say, well, I just like it like that. I just don't like it. Why? And how are you going to support it for credibility? So always remember, if you're going to do a question of value speech in persuasion, you have to first define your situation, the problem. Then you see how it stands with the standards that you're going to use to support it. Let's take a look at the examples. The question of value example: to persuade my audience that elephant trophy hunting is legally and morally wrong. The question of value main points. They had 2 there. Elephant trophy hunting violates international. Let's talk about the legality. The next one, trophy hunting violates what moral philosopher says. There's ties right in with the central idea. They only had 2 points. But it works. It works. Moving on to the next slide. No, there's no video there right now. But if you, first for organizing. When you organize the question of value persuasion speeches, remember your first main point establishes the standard of your value judgments. Just like it said, the standard was elephant trophy hunting violates international accords on species. It's hard to read with my regular glasses. On species conservation. So it tells you right there, there's my standard for my value judgment. It's illegal. Right away, they're presenting it that way. Your second main point is to apply the standard to the subject of your speech. Elephant trophy hunting violates what moral philosopher Immanuel Kant says is our duty to treat animals humanely. So now they're applying it to the standard on main point 1. Okay, now if I was in class, I'd say, any questions about that? If you do, make sure you send them to me so we can get that taken care of. All right, so let's go to the third example of persuasion speech is set up with questions of policy. Now, this is the one that we almost should, unless you talk to me, your persuasion speech should fit into this, and you'll see why. But first of all, let's define it. It is a question about whether a specific course of action should or should not be taken. That is always in your speech. Should or should not. So it makes it easy. That's one reason I like to go that direction, because that helps you guys kind of focus on, okay, what should or should not we do that I want to convince someone of. Questions of policy are daily situations. These are the ones that I'm talking about, that when you, in life, that you will have to sometimes just stand up and speak or go and fight for, or whatever, to be heard, that you will, because you're going to basically say things like, well, I should be refunded, or we should not allow this. These are the more common, the questions of policy, persuasion speeches. This is much more common than the others, just because the way it sets itself up, it lends it to what we use regularly. It deals with specific courses of action to take. And now this is interesting. It involves question of fact, maybe in the speech. It may involve questions of value within the speech of policy, but it always involves whether something should or should not be done. Should or should not will be in the speech. So when you're doing a question of policy, persuasion speech, there's two directions you can go. When you're giving this, what should or should not be done, it can either go to a passionate agreement direction, or it can go to immediate action. Both are acceptable, and you need to decide this. So first, let's look at the passive agreement. This is when a persuasive speech with a question of policy, it's your goal to convince the audience that a given policy is desirable without encouraging the audience to take action. You're just going to give your facts to support why you think it should or should not be done, but you're not going to give them any information on what to do for them to participate. It's passive. You just want them to believe like you. You're not telling them, here's your next step. But the next choice you have is immediate action. Some experts say every persuasive speech should have some expectation of the audience to respond. If you're going to put your time into it, whenever possible, have some kind of action that you can request from them. It's a little harder to set it up and prepare it because you've got to have an action planned. What can they do? As opposed to present and just for their choice, for them to believe the way you want them to believe. But the action, if you have an action that shows you're going to agree, then that reinforces their belief. Anytime somebody acts on something, it reinforces what they believe. So that's a good thing to do. It's a call to action. So be specific as possible what their next step is. Take this survey. It could be call this number and let them know how you feel. Donate. There's so many things that you could pick from. So if you'd like to take a moment, the next, or no, I don't think this is where I have the video. No, I thought that was the video place. But anyway, go on to the next part where you can get examples, your next slides, of what it would be for passive agreement example for the specific purpose, just so that you get an idea, to persuade my audience that there would be stricter privacy standards on companies that offer personal genetic testing. That's just saying what you believe they should do. But if you want immediate action, this would be a good example to persuade my audience to donate to the Wounded Warrior Project. They're presenting something for an action from their speech. And they would give their three main points would be involved on why you should donate. All right, moving on. Now, when you are doing this question of policy persuasion speeches, you got to keep in mind, whether it's the passive or whether it's immediate action that you're going for, you still have to examine, is there a need? Do you have a plan? Is it practical? The practicality of your speech. Those are three things you've got to take a look at. Let's look at the need first. That's the very first thing you should look at. It's the basic issue in analyzing a question of policy. Is there a serious problem or need that requires a change from current policy? Maybe it doesn't need changed. Maybe you just don't like it. But there's really, if you change it, are you going to create another problem? Got to look at it. Make sure there's a problem. And convince that there's a need. That's what you've got to do. There's a need, and that's in your speech. You've got to convince the audience that there is a need. All right, so now you've got to use burden of proof. Remember, the definition of burden of proof is the obligation facing a persuasive speaker to prove that a change from current policy is necessary. That's your job as a speaker. That you've got to it's the burden of proof is on you that there's a need, there is a problem to present to an audience. Then you got to examine the plan. Next slide. That's the second basic issue you've got to look at when you're analyzing a question of policy persuasion speech. Is there a problem with the current policy? Does the speaker have a plan to solve the problem? If there is a problem, do you have a plan to solve it? If you don't have a plan, then maybe it's too big, or maybe you don't have enough time to research it. The real challenge is developing a solution for a persuasion speech, especially when it's with a question of policy. And then finally, go to the next slide. Oh, I think I have a video. You can look at that if you want for a few moments. You could check that out. They're talking about puppy mills. And he does a really good job of having a plan of what he believes could help solve getting rid of puppy mills. So if you don't have time right this minute, stop the video and look at it. Go back to it and look at it. But then finally, the third thing that you have to look at is the practicality. This is an issue that you've got to use when you're analyzing a question of policy persuasion speech. Will the speaker's plan solve the problem? That's what you ask yourself. Will it solve it? In your speech, your plan, will it solve it? Will it create new or a more serious problem? Maybe it's just not practical, your plan. Got to examine that. Once you present the plan, you got to prove that it'll work. How do you do that? Well, maybe there's some things in science or whatever you're trying to prove that you research and you go, oh, because of this fact and this fact, in my opinion, this should lead to the solution. Maybe you go to somewhere that has done it before. In the video, I think that in your sample video, it's going to talk about something that she researched and she found it in California and it was successful. Anytime you can find a plan used somewhere else that you're promoting, that just supports your credibility to prove that it works. Then provide assurance to show that you've done your research. Provide that assurance to an audience. So make sure you examine the need, examine the plan, and examine the practicality. Or don't do that speech. If you can't give some answers to those 3 areas, then pick another topic. And there is a video, so you can go ahead, and it's about how she wants to curb smoking and how there was a plan in California that worked, and she would like to implement that wherever she's at. So take time to watch it now, or you can watch it later. But remember, persuasive speeches will fail if you do not give enough attention to how to persuade. So we need to look at all of these things to analyze, and it's not hard. What's the need? What's the plan? And what's my practice? Is it practical, that my plan I came up with? And if you can answer those questions, then you're on your way to give a decent persuasion speech. All right, so we're talking all this about questions of policy persuasion speeches. All right, well, when you're doing those, go on to the next slide. This is why this is a hard chapter, because within the 3 things that are the 3 important things that we have to know about persuasion speeches, there's more things in it, especially the policy, questions of policy. So once you're with the question of policy format, you've examined it, should or should not do. That's how I feel. Now you've got to figure out, how am I going to organize it? And there's 4 different ways that you can do that. Problem, solution. You're going to give the problem. You're going to give the solution. Problem, cause, solution. Now, these are all orders of how you set up a question of policy persuasion speech. The problem, cause, solution order is the most common for our class. That is what most of us will use. Unless you have a different plan, you can talk to me about it. This, I believe, is the easiest to put together. There's one more, the 4th one, but it just seems like most of the students end up going with a problem. What's the problem? What's the cause? And what's the solution? Those are their 3 main points. The cause, the solution, I'm sorry, the problem, the cause, and the solution. That seems to work for them most easy. And then there's comparative advantages order, and then the Moreau's motivated sequence order. All 4 ways to organize the actual speech. So let's take a look at the problem solution order, if you would move on to that slide. The problem solution order is a method of organizing persuasive speeches in which the first main point deals with the existence of a problem, and the second main point deals with what? The solution. Thus, problem solution order to the problem. So you're advocating a change in policy in your main points that will fall naturally from a problem to a solution. Now that's why we're not going to be doing that particular order, because that's only 2 main points. Unless you had 2 solutions, then you could have the problem, but you have 2 solutions that could happen. Possibility. Let me know if you're going to do that. And if you look at the slides for the examples, what the main point is, documents existence of a problem. Second point, presents solution to the problem. Oh, I'm sorry, I went to the wrong slide. That's what we just went over. The example is the problem solution. Example is the specific purpose. Would state something always remember, to persuade my audience that the U.S. Congress would pass legislation that will reduce lead levels in the nation's water supply. Now, what would the central idea be? Because lead is in the water supply, it is a serious problem in the United States. There's your main point. Congress should pass legislation reducing lead levels in our water. So they give the problem and they give the solution. And then there's the two main points that you would use. Make sure you read through those. Take a sec. All right, moving on to the second order, the problem, cause, solution order. And again, I told you, this is the one we use mostly in our class. It's a method of organizing persuasive speeches in which the first point identifies a problem. The second point analyzes the cause of the problem. And the third point presents a solution. It's a very simple setup. Identify the problem, analyze the causes, present a solution. You might want to jot those down just because it makes it more simple. First point identifies a problem, second point analyzes the causes, third point presents a solution. Very simple. And then there we have the solution. We have some examples of the problem, cause, solution example. Specific purpose statement: to persuade my audience that action is required to deal with the problem of childhood obesity. All right, what would be the central idea? Childhood obesity is a serious problem that can be controlled by changes in diet and exercise. Now, those were the three main points. It's a problem controlled by diet and exercise. Now you look into the main points. Childhood obesity is a major problem in the U.S. There are two major causes that increases the childhood obesity, and then solve the problem. What are you going to talk about? You can watch that video now if you like. It's about the childhood obesity, and you can just gives you a little taste of that. The third order for persuasive speeches that are questions of policy is comparative advantage. It's a method of organizing a persuasive speech in which each main point explains why a speaker's solution to a problem is preferable to other proposed solutions. So you basically have the solution, but each point's going to talk about the solution. Let's look at it. And you compare. You compare to other things to show that this is why it's an advantage to do it this way. Back to the examples. Specific purpose statement: to persuade my audience that our city should build a rapid bus system instead of a new highway. Central idea: a rapid bus system will be cheaper, more effective than a new highway. And then, now this only had two main points, but research models show, and then research models also show, they're constantly comparing and telling why they are going to persuade you for those points. And let's see. Oh, and you can watch that video too. I just went over the examples, but there's a little, oh no, I'm not. I'm wrong. It says no video. It's hard when I don't have them up here and I just have them on my notes like that. And I'm trying to remind you to turn the page, so to speak, while you're watching this. And finally, the last order that you can use for the questions of policy persuasion speeches. It's called the motivated sequence order. Now, it's a 5-step sequence method of organizing persuasive speeches that seek immediate action. Advertisers use this form all the time. And it was developed by Alan Monroe in 1930, and they still use this as a primary advertising format. They usually use this I would say you could use this instead of the problem, cause, solution order. This is a very easy one too, if you would like to set it up like this. Our assignment next week, you're going to be watching, not giving the assignment today, but next week I'll give you the assignment for you to watch a commercial, and you will fit it into these categories. Very simple. Like you'll just write a sentence for each one just to fit it into the category. But let's look at the 5 steps. Go on to the next slide. There's attention, which would, in parentheses, is the intro of your speech. Then there's the need, the satisfaction, and the visualization. Those would be your 3 main points. In the need, you make an audience feel the need for a change. You state clearly and use your supporting materials for that first point to say, hey, here's the need, here's the problem. Then the second main point would have something to do with the satisfaction. It arouses a sense of need that you satisfy it with a solution to the problem. You offer the details that will be the solution to the problem. And then the third main point is visualization. Now, visualize the desire that it would be better with my solution. And then use that vivid imagery and vocal variety to get that point across. Then finally, the action. And that should be in your conclusion. Once the audience is convinced that a policy is beneficial, call them to action. How? Got to explain how to do that. Keep it simple, but got to give them a course of action. If there's too many steps for them to participate or for them to react and do some type of action, they're going to be like, that's all right. But if it's just as simple as go online to this site, click here, phone call, fill out a form. You've got to know exactly what to do in the call to action. So that would be the 5 steps of it's called motivated sequence steps. And so they sometimes refer to as Monroe's, because he's the one that developed it. So it's Monroe's motivated sequence order. And then if you go on, you can see the examples, how each one, and it's all listed so that you can see the attention, which is the intro, the need, satisfaction, the visualization are your 3 main points. And then finally, I encourage you to leave your laptop at home and put pen to paper instead. That is your conclusion. So definitely look through those samples, read through those slides on your example of the Monroe's motivated sequence order. Well, we made it. We made it through. And like I said, it's one of the hardest chapters because there's a lot of buzzwords that seem to go in this chapter to understand persuasion speeches. So if you could not follow something that maybe I left out that wasn't on your handout, I think I did, because I tried to write handout on my papers so that I definitely knew you could I'd get those in. But if there's something missing, please let me know and I'll help you out with that. If there's any questions. All right, what is your course of action right now? You just had this chapter on persuasion speeches. I am going to have in your Canvas, I might have it printed. I don't know. I'll if I don't have it there on Tuesday, then you will have it in Canvas for sure. But a whole list of persuasion topics that you might be interested in, and it might help you give a springboard. I do want to know what topic you pick. I want that approved before you do it. This is your biggest speech, and I want to make sure you have enough material, and if it's valid, to do as a persuasion speech to get our problem, get our solution, get at least in that general, and get your or get our cause and then get your solution, that we follow those three main areas. So I do want that. But start thinking, what are you passionate about in life that some people are not passionate, or they may not agree with you, but you know that you think it's right, or you think it's wrong, that some issue is happening. Should or should not. Those are good buzzwords to help determine your persuasion speech. So if you have any questions, let me know, and get those handouts into me so you can be charted in my book and on Canvas that you attended. Okay? Thank you very much. I'll see you in class, and good luck with your speeches. All right. Good night.